Hello, welcome to the weekly economic snapshot. We've got a new Colorado Legislative Assembly session starting up, and I'm joined today by Ed Sealover of the Sum and Substance. Ed, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Bill. I really appreciate it.
So Ed, before we get into the session, tell us about the Sum and Substance.
Thanks for asking. The Sum and Substance is a publication of the Colorado Chamber of Commerce. It's a news site that deals very specifically with business policy. And while I do work for an interest group in the Chamber of Commerce, I try to write it down the middle with the goal of just publicizing business issues, which too often get lost in the talk of all the hot button issues at the session. So it's a place to go to follow, especially over the course of this legislative session, what's coming up that's going to affect business.
Well, I found it to be a great resource. So I'm really glad you're here as we are kicking off a new session. So looking at the state assembly, state legislature this year, it doesn't look a lot different from last year if you just look at kind of the top line numbers of which parties are in control. I guess under the surface, are there any significant differences with this year's group compared to last year's?
Well, there are a couple of those, actually. And as you're right, the Senate remains with a split of 23 Democrats, 12 Republicans. The Republicans gained back 3 seats in the House, but they still sit at a 43-22 disadvantage there. What's interesting is some of the dynamics in the caucuses have changed. In the House, for example, many of the most progressive members from last session are not coming back. Either they lost in primaries, lost in the general election, decided not to run for re-election. And so there's a question of whether does that moderate the House Democratic caucus at all? Does that give a chance for bills that might have failed last year because they were seen as too moderate to make it through? That's one thing that'll be worth watching. In the Senate, meanwhile, the numbers are the exact same. But what's curious is that a lot of bills died or got tamped down in the Senate, referring to bills that affect business last year, by a group of about a half dozen moderates who had specific weight and influence on those bills. 3 of the 6 moderates are gone because of term limits or choosing to resign. And it's unknown whether you're going to see replacements step up, whether there's going to be such a moderate voice, or whether this caucus that's the same size is going to start tilting a little bit more toward the left.
Interesting. So one of the big issues last year and in recent years has been housing affordability. Do we expect anything to be done further on that front this year?
Well, I don't think housing affordability is going to be as big a topic as it was during the last 2 sessions. That's largely because Governor Polis and his allies passed a package of about 6 bills last year that really tried to take care of the problem. And now it's a matter of implementing them over years and seeing how they do. I think you're going to see one issue in particular that has lingered for about a decade at the legislature come up to the forefront in housing affordability this year. And that's the issue of construction defects reform. Many builders and housing advocates are saying the state's tort laws are such that it's too easy for a small group of people to sue over construction defects. And that has driven insurance prices for condo projects through the roof and has really kind of shut down the condo market in the state. Less than 5% of new housing is being built in condos, and very few of them are affordable. There's going to be another effort this year to push a bill that would make it a little bit harder to file lawsuits in this, that would really send more of these disputes to repair than to the court system. Now, that made it through the Senate last year, didn't make it through the House, but the sponsor thinks that things are changing a little bit, and that Governor Polis is becoming more involved in this conversation as well. So I think that's going to be the big housing affordability topic you're going to see. However, the topic of affordability in general is not going away. That's something you're going to hear from both parties right now. And I think that's going to play out in a number of bills. One of them, for example, is an effort being pushed by a number of business organizations for regulatory reform. A report came out recently, commissioned by my organization. I had nothing to do in the writing of it, that showed that Colorado is the 6th most regulated state in the country. And that 45% of regulations may be considered redundant or excessive compared to the average in the country. There is going to be a big push for an examination of the regulations that businesses face in the state right now, whether they are making their point, whether they're making it much harder to do business, and whether the benefits just simply do not meet the costs and are driving businesses services out or keeping them from expanding because of that. So I think that's going to revolve around the cost of doing business, the affordability of doing a business in Colorado. And if it's not housing affordability, affordability will still be at the center of a discussion like that.
Well, certainly the costs of doing business get passed on to consumers, so I can see where that could tie into that general heading of affordability. What are some of the other big issues that business in particular is going to be looking for out of the session?
I think the first thing you're going to see coming out of the gate is going to be an effort, and labor advocates have announced this already, to change the state's Labor Peace Act. Now, the Labor Peace Act, for those who aren't familiar with it, is an 82-year-old law that can be seen in many ways as a compromise between the right-to-work states and the very pro-union states in this country. It is a requirement that there must be 2 elections for unionizing a workforce. The first to unionize, and the second, which requires 75% approval to allow for mandatory paycheck deductions that go toward union activities and organizing from every one of the employees. Union leaders say this is too burdensome, this is too big a barrier, and it's kept the unionization of the private sector down around 7% right now. They're looking to get rid of the second election. Business leaders say, no, the second election is important. One, because in an age of economic development, when people are looking to avoid some of the most easily unionizable states when they're expanding their business, this is key because it sets us apart from other states. And also they're saying, look, this is going to wreck too big a barrier between management and workers if we see more unionization. But that's going right out of the gate. And I think business will be paying a lot of attention to that. I think you're also going to see a lot of focus on artificial intelligence. And this is a topic that some people might look at and say, well, that affects a very small amount of businesses. But the truth is, with the increasing use of AI, it affects a whole lot of businesses. Colorado last year passed the most comprehensive AI regulatory bill in the country, but it doesn't take effect until February of 2026. And there's been a lot of talk among technology leaders that some of the provisions are so onerous right now that companies are going to flee the state and go work in other states if they stay in place. The governor's put together a task force that's really trying to look into cutting that balance between protecting people from algorithmic discrimination by AI systems and by allowing companies to flourish as Colorado wants to use its advantage in technology to stay at the top of the pack here. So there's going to be a decent amount of talk about that. And another topic that may seem a little bit wonky that I want to mention is going to be a big fight over the 340B federal drug pricing program. And I know most people would say, what on earth are you talking about, Ed? The drug pricing program is one that allows for hospitals that serve a certain percentage of uninsured or publicly insured patients to get pretty steep discounts on drugs that they buy from manufacturers. Now, manufacturers are noting this has grown 50% nationally in the last 2 years. They're pushing back saying, we're going to put some restrictions on this. You're allowed to use it at one pharmacy, for example. And hospitals are saying, if you cut off our access to these discounts, some of us could literally go under. I mean, you see hospitals saying, look, we made $2 million last year and we saved $12 million because of this drug pricing program. Where are we going to find this money from? For those who say, well, that doesn't affect me, the truth is anybody who has insurance is probably affected by this. You may be getting 340B drug discounts or may benefit from it in some way, such as a hospital propping up an unprofitable, say, behavioral health program to provide the community with the money that it saves here. So this is going to be a big fight between hospitals and pharmaceutical manufacturers that's going to involve a lot of other people and business leaders as well.
Interesting. And well, healthcare is also a huge part of the state budget. And it sounds like the state budget is going to be tight this year. What has led to this tight budget situation, and who do you expect to end up getting squeezed the most?
Everyone. But it's a great segue, Bill, because you're right. The budget, there is a budget deficit now of about $670 million between what the state wants to put toward programs and what it has to put toward programs. There are two things that are really leading this. One is the growth of spending in Medicaid. And it's not that we're seeing more people in Medicaid. In fact, actually, a number of people have left the Medicaid rolls over the last couple of years. But the growth in acuity of Medicaid cases is growing. So people aren't going in to see a doctor on Medicaid anymore for a typical primary care visit. They're spending significant time in the hospital. And the state can't do anything about that unless it changes the parameters of the Medicaid program, which it has shown no interest in doing, which hospitals are asking it not to do. So that's cutting the state budget. And ironically, the lack of inflation or the shrinking amounts of inflation is hurting the state budget, because that used to drive up the taxpayer Bill of Rights revenue cap that allowed the state to keep more money. Without high inflation, that cap lowers and the state has to give more money back to citizens via tax refunds. So who's going to get squeezed in this? Everyone. The governor, for example, has proposed cutting $110 million out of the highway and transportation budget to help pay for this. That's something that worries business leaders and transportation advocates a lot. The governor has proposed new funding formulas for schools that are going to hit the districts hardest, where they've seen a decrease in students in the last couple of years. Schools are pushing back on that. And the governor has even proposed privatizing Pinnacle Assurance, which is the state-chartered workers' compensation insurance plan that serves more businesses than any in Colorado, and they get steep discounts through tax breaks, being that it's a state-chartered entity. There can be a lot of money made by the state in privatizing this and letting them become a business that works on its own. But there are also some red flags for people saying, but will they provide the same kind of service? So these are all going to be big debates around the budget. And for the first time in years, frankly, business is being drawn into a budget debate that's usually held beyond the sphere of the things that most interest business leaders.
Interesting. Well, that sounds like our state representatives and senators have their work cut out for them and have some very difficult choices and probably some contentious debates coming up.
This is going to be a very packed 120-day session, and I don't expect there will be a lot of downtime between now and the middle of May.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to reading your coverage of it in the Sum and Substance. Ed, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Bill, and thanks for what you do.
And thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next week.